Staying with us here on the AM report, other news we're tracking for you. Militant group Islamic State is believed to be funding an insurgency in Mozambique's gas-rich Cabo Delgado province. Now, the group has threatened South Africa with grave, this is a quote, grave financial, security and military consequences should it intervene in the war in Mozambique. Now, terrorism experts believe that South Africa could become a target. They've cautioned authorities to tighten the country's borders after a police raid in the Vaal uncovered ammunition and ISIS training manuals. So just how vulnerable is South Africa to Islamic insurgencies? Martin Ewe is an expert in terrorism in Africa, and he's a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, joining us now via our Zoom link from Pretoria. Martin, good morning. Thanks for your time on the AM report. This is a story that we've sporadically reported on as various threats have emerged in different contexts. But put it in the picture for us. How exposed, how vulnerable are we as South Africa, not least because we are, economically at least, one of the strongest countries on the continent?
Thank you very much, and good morning to your viewers. I just want to start off by saying, look, the situation in Africa is not better. In Africa, since the pandemic started, we face increased terrorist attacks, whether you look at it from the Sahel, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, or you look at it in the Lake Chad Basin region, where we have Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. All along, we've faced increased terrorist attacks. And now we also see the same trend in Mozambique, where since this year, the terrorist groups there have increased their attacks. What is bad with the Mozambican situation is the involvement of ISIS, the Islamic State. Previously, the insurgency was really local, and that local situation became now international with the involvement of the Islamic State. And it is the Islamic State that is threatening South Africa. Now, we have to take this seriously. It is not, however, a case for the public to panic. This is really a fight that should take place on the ground. We say it is a fight for the intelligence. It is still at that level that South Africa can win the battle. And I think it is in that perspective that we're saying that South Africa need to reassess the security of the country, need to tighten borders, need to tighten security of infrastructures, critical infrastructures, because those will be the areas that the Islamic State would like to target. And therefore, if these areas are protected, if they strike will not have much destruction as if they were to strike a critical infrastructure in South Africa. So therefore, because Africa faces an increased threat of terrorism, South Africa, close to Mozambique, is also facing the same threat. So I think it has to be put first in that general perspective before we look at the internal dimension of the threat itself.
So Martin, you're saying we face an increased threat of terrorism, particularly on the continent, and you're saying it's increased in the wake of COVID-19. What are some of the factors that COVID-19 and the resultant lockdowns have brought that have made the continent more susceptible?
Look, so far we've not yet conducted empirical evidence to really show why is it that these groups have increased attacks during the COVID-19 period. We can only speculate that the conditions on the continent, particularly the lockdown and the focus given to the fight against the pandemic, has given terrorists the leeway, thinking that countries will not have the capacity, or even if they have, they will not pay much attention to them because they are focused on combating the health pandemic that the whole world faces. But what we have seen really, it's very, very serious in the sense that if you look at it, especially from Boko Haram, the kind of attacks that they've carried out this year have just been deadlier than before. They've hit Chad, which was a country that was previously not spared, but had never faced the kind of attacks that Boko Haram has carried out this year. We've also seen heavy attacks in Nigeria, heavy attacks in Burkina Faso, in Mali. So all of this, I think, even though we can't really prove with evidence, say that the conditions imposed by COVID-19 and the focus that states have given to fighting the pandemic has really given terrorists, the opportunity, to increase their attacks.
So, Martin, like I said to you at the start of our interview, we have faced at least threats of attacks in South Africa in the past. And with you now saying that South Africa remains a target on the continent, particularly for various reasons, some of them economic, we're asking for our authorities to be more vigilant. But can we laud them for being vigilant already, having prevented any attacks to date?
Yeah, I'm basically saying that, look, if the whole continent is threatened, South Africa is threatened. If the whole continent faces an increased attack, South Africa equally faces that increased attack. Because these groups, as we know, have elements in South Africa, have some presence in South Africa. And that's making it very, very dangerous, because if they want to strike, they can strike at any time. But if the security agencies are awake, it will reduce the chances of these groups being able to strike in South Africa. And I think that's what we are calling for. So the threat that South Africa faces is one, very generic in terms of the continental threats. Second, it is a little bit more focused in the sense of Mozambique being a neighbor to South Africa, and which faces an increased attacks. And we know that these groups do not want South Africa to intervene, purely because they know that South Africa is going to bring a fighting power that will really be able to eliminate them or pose a serious threat to their existence. And therefore, in order to prevent that from happening, they have to threaten South Africa not to get involved. And I think terrorist threats, especially ISIS, as we know from other areas, from other countries, from other regions, and even in Africa in particular, we've seen that when they issue such threats and they are not heeded to, they tend to execute that threat to the letter. So therefore, we are saying that the threat needs to be taken seriously, but it is not for the South African public to panic about it, because so far this is a war that is taking place underground, and it should be fought underground and won underground. So if South Africa takes the necessary measures, the necessary security measures, I think that we can overcome the threat. I
mean, it's incredibly worrying. My blood's kind of running cold here as you're describing what really is a very real threat to our security as a country, Martin. And just in terms of, as we wrap up our interview, in terms of how our law enforcement agencies address a threat like this, this is not about, or at least it's not only about, ideological or religious beliefs. This is criminality that should be tackled in that way.
Well, terrorism by nature, it's criminality, but we cannot also, despite the ideological angle of it, which is what motivates many of the fighters. Look, South Africa, this is not a new threat to South Africa. I'm sure that there is capacity in this country, there is strength for this country to be able to overcome that threat. And I think they're already doing a very good job. You've mentioned the seizure of arms recently. You've mentioned some other incidents that, have proven that the government is awake and is actually responding to the threat.
Martin, I want to ask you just one more question. In terms of the threat to South Africa related to Mozambique, is it because of our proximity to Mozambique? What are the other issues at play here?
The proximity factor is one, but you also have the fact that the Islamists or the insurgents in Mozambique have somehow learned through sources that South Africa is going to intervene, is going to help Mozambique to fight the insurgency. And I think that's the biggest threat that they face. And I think that's the major factor for them to come up with this threat to South Africa. It is really because South Africa is going to intervene. If South Africa were to say we are not going to intervene, we stay as we have all this while, probably they will not be able to carry out the attack. And that will create the balance that if South Africa were to intervene, they will try to execute that mandate that they have given.
So, Martin,
but what we need to know,
are you saying that we bowed to that pressure?
If I could just finish the train of thought.
Ahead.
What we need to know is that, look, if South Africa is intervening, I think South Africa will have greater strength and greater bargain, greater leverage to fight the insurgency if it is intervening within the framework of a regional intervention. Whatever measures are being taken should be taken within a regional framework so that the other neighboring countries can contribute. Because if South Africa tightens its borders and the other neighboring countries are not, that threat will still be very, very visible.
Yeah. So you're saying we don't bow to that kind of threat, that if we intervene in Mozambique, that South Africa will face the consequences. We wouldn't bow to that kind of threat from a terrorist organization.
Well, it will be difficult for South Africa to buy into that threat, because government do not bow to terrorist threats. Government, they don't negotiate with terrorists. Governments are not afraid of terrorists because they are more powerful. They believe they are more powerful. They have more fighting power. If South Africa were to stand a fight with the Islamic State, certainly South Africa will win, in a face-to-face combat. But, of course, the tactics that terrorists use is one that, very few governments in the world have been able to defeat terrorism. So that attempt for one country to say we want to defeat a threat like ISIS, which is global, I think it will be miscalculated.
Martin,